My wife was shocked when she received the divorce letter at the dinner she was having with her lover. I had found out everything. I followed her and saw her going into the restaurant to meet another man, so I sent the divorce letter through the waitress who delivered it to her. That was the beginning of my comeback. While she smiled, with that smile that used to be mine, touching the hand of a stranger with the same fingers that used to trace promises on my skin, I watched from afar. I watched as if watching the silent collapse of an entire life built with care, stone by stone, day after day, alongside someone who claimed to love me. I didn't feel anger at that moment. Nor fury. What I felt was something much worse, a kind of emptiness that sucks everything inside, as if the memories, the promises, the plans, everything were being ripped away with the same coldness with which she arranged the napkin on her lap. There was no doubt anymore. The nights she said she was exhausted, the endless meetings, the automatic smiles on Sunday mornings, it all made sense now. The cruelest thing of all was that I still loved her. Maybe that was why it hurt so much. When the waitress walked over to their table with the white envelope in her hands, I shivered. The letter had been written with the same precision with which I used to write her birthday cards. Sharp words, but honest. She opened the envelope. I read in her eyes, from a distance, the transition between surprise, panic and shame. She tried to hide it. But there was no hiding the abyss that opened up there, right in the middle of the crowded restaurant. And I left. I didn't wait for drama. I didn't wait for explanations. In fact, nothing else she said would make a difference. What I didn't know was that this would be just the first move in a game that went much deeper than I could have imagined. What seemed like a shameful end would become the beginning of my liberation. The weight of her betrayal pushed me toward a kind of rebirth. The pain shaped me. It rebuilt me. But it wasn't quick. Nor was it easy. For days, the sound of her laughter on the phone with her lover echoed in my mind. The memories of family Sundays, of trips, of the way she looked at me as if I were the only one in the world, all of this turned into a collection of lies that I turned over night after night, trying to understand when everything was lost. I wasn't just betrayed by her. I was betrayed by myself. For having believed, for having trusted, for having given my entire heart to someone who, in the end, didn't know how to hold it with both hands. And yet, I blamed myself. Because that's what we do when we're betrayed. We wonder what we did wrong. Where it failed. Because it wasn't enough. And she kept trying to manipulate everything. Sent messages. He called. He said it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. That it was just a confusion, a lack, a moment. Empty words from someone who had already planned every detail of the lie. I didn't answer. I just acted. Coldly. Precisely. Like someone who had nothing left to lose. And the more I pulled away, the more she tried to get closer. With each ignored message, with each silence I left in place of a response, she went a little crazier. The confident woman who had betrayed me began to lose herself. And the lover? Ah, the lover. He disappeared as soon as he realized he wouldn't get what he expected. Maybe he thought she would inherit something, that she would have access to a stable, comfortable, easy life. But no. He was gone, and she was left alone. Stripped of the lies, facing the reflection of who she really was. It was then that the unexpected happened. Something that no betrayal script usually foresees. When she tried to win me back, desperate, willing to do anything, begging for another chance, asking only to talk, to have a coffee, to see me one last time, the one who opened the door was the woman who was now by my side. She wasn't just my divorce lawyer. She was someone who had seen all the dirt. Who had read every word of her arguments. Who had analyzed the numbers, the assets, the betrayals, the lies. And still, she still looked at me with clear, sincere eyes, as if it were possible to believe again. The look on my ex-wife's face when she saw who was now occupying the place that was once hers, was indescribable. A mix of disbelief, pain and regret. She finally understood. That while she was destroying what we had, I was rebuilding what was. That the man she despised was the same man someone admired now. And that, perhaps, was the real punishment. Not the divorce. Not the exposure. But the fact that she had lost a true love, while chasing after a passing delusion. She tried to stop me. She said she still loved me. That she regretted it. That I was making a mistake. But it was too late. I was no longer that man willing to beg for love. Now, she was the one begging. And the silence I gave in response, was the final sentence. But what she never knew, and may never find out, is what was written on the last page of the divorce decree. Because there, hidden among cold clauses and legal terms, was the sentence I wrote with the most pain and the most truth: you killed me, but I was reborn better than I ever was. And that's what she didn't understand. That betrayal can be the end for those who drown in pain. But for me, it was the beginning of a new story. A story that still holds one final detail. A revelation that changes everything. Because there is something she never imagined, something that was hidden until the last moment, and that, when it comes to light, will show that her betrayal had a much higher price than just losing a husband. She lost the only man who was willing to forgive. But there's one detail she never knew, and that's what will change everything. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never romanticize cheating. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry deep truths. They show how betrayal is capable of destroy lives, families, and hearts. Our purpose is clear: to reveal, through fiction, the devastating impact of disloyalty. Brace yourself. What you are about to hear is shocking, intense, and unforgettable. Good story. At first glance, Jason and Emily seemed like a couple that would easily inspire happily ever after novels. They had been together for almost 12 years, married for 9, and shared a story that began modestly, with an exchange of glances in a small bookstore they both frequented on Saturdays, and grew silently until it became love. He was a financial analyst, methodical, detail-oriented, the kind of person who calculates the future with the same precision with which they distribute words in a birthday note. Emily, a high school literature teacher, had a spontaneous lightness, an almost childlike sparkle in her eyes when she talked about books, art, and dreams. The connection between the two was not due to opposites attracting each other, but to hidden similarities, to a mutual admiration that was born even before they touched. He loved to listen, she loved to tell stories. He was silence, she was sound. But between them, there was harmony. The house they lived in reflected this balance. A simple-looking two-story house, but with a carefully arranged interior. Every object, every painting, every book, had a meaning. There was a plant in the entryway that she insisted on calling our guardian, and a gray couch that, over time, had taken the shape of the two of them intertwined on Friday nights. On Sundays, he would make coffee while she made pancakes. On the kitchen walls, there were photos of trips and birthdays, and one in particular, hanging above the living room door, captured a moment of pure happiness, the two of them sitting on the edge of a bridge, laughing at something only they knew. In the early years, the days flowed naturally. Jason was the kind of man who showed his love in practical gestures. He organized the bills, checked the car, put gas in her tank even when she didn't ask. Emily, on the other hand, was pure affection, notes left in his wallet, unexpected texts, long hugs at the end of the day. Their love was not loud, but it was everywhere. They had plans, lots of them. They talked about children, traveling to Europe, opening a cafe bookstore when they retired. They even had a name, between the lines. It was that kind of couple. Dreamers, but with their feet on the ground. And despite the rush of the days, the routine that was gradually becoming repetitive, there was a calm certainty among them that they were in the right place, with the right person. Over time, however, small cracks began to appear. Nothing that an outside observer could point out. But anyone who lives the routine of a relationship notices the silences that didn't exist before, the glances that don't meet as much as before. Jason started working more. He would arrive tired, distracted, sometimes forgetting details, the tea she liked, the movie they promised to watch together. Emily, in turn, became more involved with the work. He started teaching at night, took on the coordination of a reading project with teenagers and started hanging out more with his schoolmates. They still kissed when they left and arrived, but the kisses started to last less, the hugs lost some of their strength. Nothing serious, some would think. But love doesn't scream when it ends, it fades away in silence. Even so, there were still moments of reconnection. Short trips, weekends at inns, birthdays celebrated with simple but affectionate dinners. Emily said she missed him, and Jason promised he would organize his schedule better. He said he was tired, and she said she understood. And they believed it. Or at least they wanted to believe it. No one gets married thinking that love will get lost in the cracks of everyday life. And, deep down, there was still affection. Respect. Bonds that are not easily severed. They were adults, mature, aware that every relationship goes through phases. So, they pushed through the absences with the hope that everything would fall into place with time. Close friends noticed subtle changes. Emily would show up alone at some get-togethers, and she would say that Jason was swamped with work. When asked, Jason would say that Emily was always involved in 1,000 activities. The excuses seemed plausible. Even natural to someone who knows the rhythm of long-term marriages. But there was a kind of mismatch in their gazes, as if they were each tuned into different frequencies. And even though they still shared the same roof, they no longer shared the same thoughts. At work, Jason maintained the same reputation as always, responsible, focused, and calm-spoken. But his more attentive colleagues noticed something more introspective in his behavior. He spent more time in the office and avoided talking about his personal life. When questioned, he smiled and said that his marriage was going well, and that he was just dealing with the usual rush. Emily was also admired at school. Her students adored her, and her colleagues saw her as someone who was passionate about her profession. However, her laugh was different. Less spontaneous. Her eyes, when they weren't talking about literature, seemed to hold stories she didn't want to tell. Time passed, the seasons changed, and the routine continued. On their wedding anniversary, they had a simple dinner at home. Jason brought flowers. Emily lit candles. They ate, toasted, and remembered their first trip together. They laughed, yes, but there was something between them that was unsaid. Something like an invisible space growing, silent, between the two. It was as if they were still together out of habit, or fear, or because of that stubborn hope that insists on resisting even when everything seems lost. They didn't fight. They didn't argue. But they also didn't look for each other like before. In the room they shared, they still slept side by side. But the bodies were no longer sought out as frequently. Touches became occasional. The desire, shy. When they made love, there was an almost sad delicacy, as if they were both trying to remember what had once been natural. Jason would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and watch her sleep. He wondered if she still loved him, if she was still happy. Emily, at other times, would wake up and pretend to stay asleep, afraid of what she would find if she looked him in the eye. Both carried doubts that they never verbalized. But love sometimes turns into something harder to name. It wasn't dislike, nor repulsion. It was a kind of waiting. As if they were both standing on opposite sides of a bridge, waiting for the other to take the first step. And neither of them did. Maybe out of fear. Maybe out of pride. Or, who knows, because the feeling that once united them was still there, dormant, waiting to be rediscovered. And that's why, even amidst silences and separations, they still sat down to dinner together. They still shared old dreams that refused to die. There was still complicity in details, like the way he cut her bread on Sunday mornings, or the way she adjusted his tie before going out. On the surface, they were still the couple everyone knew. But inside, everyone was fighting their own battles. And it is in this scenario, between the routine that comforts and suffocates, between the past that weighs and the future that frightens, that the real story begins. Because sometimes, love doesn't die. He just falls asleep. And when you wake up, if you wake up, it may be too late to hold on to what's already gone. What Jason didn't know yet was that, in that same scenario where he felt just tired, he was about to discover that what he felt as emptiness was, in fact, just the harbinger of something much bigger. Something that would transform not only his view on marriage, but on who he was. And about how far someone is capable of going when they feel betrayed not only by the one they love, but by everything they believe to be true. Now tell me if it's okay so we can move on to the next part of the story. In the days following their last wedding anniversary, Jason began to notice details that had previously escaped his weary eyes. They weren't blatant evidence, nor were they obvious proofs. They were small deviations in behavior, silent gestures that betrayed a distance deeper than any words could explain. Emily, always so present, began to disappear in fragments. Sometimes, when she left work, she would say she was going to a parent-teacher meeting, but she would come back later than usual. Other times, she would leave her cell phone face down, something she had never done before. Jason didn't want to believe that something was wrong. Not with her. Not with them. But the instinct that grew inside him, that restlessness that took shape during the sleepless nights, said otherwise. There was a different coldness to the goodnight hugs. A strange rush to turn off the bedroom lights. The absence of easy laughter in trivial conversations. Jason tried to rationalize everything, to convince himself that they were just going through a phase, that the wear and tear of the routine was responsible for all of that. Until one night, while preparing dinner, he heard Emily talking on the phone upstairs. His voice was low, but it carried a sweet tone that was no longer familiar to him. The kind of sweetness that used to be uniquely yours. He didn't go up. Didn't interrupt. He was left only listening to the muffled sound of the words and, finally, the absolute silence that followed when she hung up. At that moment, something inside him gave way. The doubt that previously walked in silence, began to scream. Jason was not an impulsive man. His world was made of logic, of structure. And perhaps that was why he decided to confront his suspicions the only way he knew how, by gathering information. In the following days, he began to observe more. He began to note the dates and times when she said she went out with coworkers. He checked credit card receipts. He found restaurant reservations that didn't match the commitments she said she had. As he connected the dots, the line that emerged was too clear to deny. But he didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, he kept quiet. He wanted to see how far she would go with her lie. He wanted to understand the extent of her betrayal. Emily, for her part, seemed to live in another time. I was more vain. New makeup appeared in the bathroom, different lingerie appeared on the dresser. She smiled more on her cell phone than when she looked into her husband's eyes. When he was at home, he was friendly but absent. Like someone who plays a role, but no longer feels the script is theirs. Jason noticed everything. And the more he noticed, the more he sank into a state of restraint that made him seem cold, almost indifferent. But inside, it was as if the ground beneath his feet was slowly dissolving. One Saturday afternoon, while organizing papers in his home office, he found a note. It was inside a book she had left on the table, marked by a dried flower. The handwriting was not Emily's. It was a simple message, but full of intimacy. Words that carried a pent-up desire, written by someone who clearly felt comfortable addressing her freely. Jason read the note as if he were reading his own sentence. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just took a deep breath and closed the book. It was confirmation that something he still refused to admit had happened. Emily had another man. In the days that followed, he continued to act with the same meticulous calm. He began to plan. He consulted lawyers, organized documents, analyzed his finances. It was as if the pain was fuel for a new strength, a new clarity. He didn't want revenge. Not yet. He wanted lucidity. He wanted to understand why. But above all, he wanted to free himself from doubt. It wasn't enough to know. He needed to see. He needed to look into her eyes at the exact moment she knew that he knew. And so, one Wednesday night, he decided to follow her. Emily came out dressed in understated elegance. She said she was going to a dinner to wrap up her project with her teachers. Jason smiled, kissed her on the forehead, and wished her luck. He waited in silence for her to leave, and a few minutes later, he got in the car and followed her. He didn't have to go far. The restaurant he had chosen was one of those with an intimate atmosphere, dim lighting, and instrumental music in the background. Jason parked across the street, in a dark spot. He watched her get out of the car, fix her hair in front of the window, and smile. She wasn't alone. A man was waiting for her at the door. Tall, well-dressed, younger. They greeted each other with a kiss on the cheek, but it wasn't a regular kiss. It was long. It was intimate. Jason felt a twinge in his chest. A part of him still wanted to believe there could be another explanation. But there wasn't. He watched the two enter. He remained inside the car for several minutes, trying to absorb the scene he had just witnessed. So he picked up the phone and made a call. Short, objective. He asked for a favor. Something simple. When he hung up, he took the envelope from the glove compartment. Inside, a single sheet, folded with precision. It was the divorce letter. I had written it days before, on the impulse of someone who knew they needed to close a cycle, but didn't yet know how to do it. Now I knew. Jason crossed the street with firm, unhurried steps. He entered the restaurant and identified the table where she was. They were laughing. She was laughing with that laugh that had once been hers alone. He felt a metallic taste in his mouth, but he didn't hesitate. He discreetly called a waitress, handed her the envelope and explained calmly, "Give it to the woman at table 2, as soon as she was serving the wine." Then he left without looking back. He went back to the car. His breathing was heavy. His hands were shaking. He sat down, rested his forehead on the steering wheel and closed his eyes. It was no longer a doubt. It was reality. The woman he had loved for 12 years had made a choice. And now he was making his. Minutes later, he watched from afar the scene that would mark the end of an era. He saw the waitress approach. He saw Emily's expression change when she opened the envelope. He saw her eyes jump from her words to the void, her mouth open in a frustrated attempt to say something. The man in front of her watched her, confused. She tried to hide it, but there was panic in every gesture. Jason watched everything with an almost surgical calm. He no longer felt pain. Above all, he felt a strange relief. As if he had finally woken up from a long nightmare. But what he didn't know yet was that that night, marked by the shock of revelation, was just the harbinger of something even greater. Because while Emily was trying to deal with the impact of the exposure, a new piece was moving silently on the board. A piece that carried a secret that would change everything Jason thought he knew about his own history. And when that truth comes out, neither she nor he will be prepared for what is to come. The morning after the letter was delivered, Emily didn't come home. Jason woke up late, something unusual for him, his body exhausted from the emotional discharge of the previous night. For a moment, when he opened his eyes, he felt the weight of her absence on the left side of the bed and a strange peace invaded his chest, as if the emptiness there was the silent confirmation that, from that moment on, everything had really changed. His cell phone flashed with dozens of missed calls and messages from her, some short, some long, all filled with barely disguised despair. But he didn't answer. He spent the day in silence, mentally reorganizing the spaces of his own life, wondering how something so solid had collapsed so precisely. That night, for the first time in a long time, he slept soundly. On the second day, she showed up. She let herself in without knocking, using her own key, with red eyes and the haggard face of someone who had spent hours trying to put out a fire that she herself had started. Jason was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, as he did every day. When he saw her, he didn't say a word. She walked towards him with slow, hesitant steps, and for a few seconds she remained there, still, waiting for a reaction that never came. Then he sat down in front of her and began to talk. The trembling, broken voice asked for understanding, explained gaps, supported itself with fragile justifications. Jason listened without interrupting. His face was impassive, his eyes fixed on her as if he were watching a stranger trying to tell a story that no longer belonged to him. She said it was a mistake, that she didn't plan anything, that she felt alone, ignored, needy. He said he regretted it, that the other man meant nothing, that all he wanted now was a chance to make things right. Jason, still silent, stood up, grabbed his coffee and turned his back. It wasn't indifference. It was the limit of what I could feel. Emily continued, now more distressed. She said she remembered everything they had built together, that he was the love of her life, that she had never thought about leaving him. She spoke as if she were trying to stop an avalanche with her hands. But Jason finally spoke. He said he didn't believe a single word that came out of her mouth. That betrayal isn't just about the body, it's about the mind, it's about intention, it's about the conscious choice to cross a line knowing that on the other side someone will be destroyed. She cried. She tried to touch his hand. He pulled away. He said he had already made his decision. That she didn't love him anymore, and maybe she didn't even know what love meant. She denied it, between sobs, and it was then that he dropped the cup in the sink with force and looked her in the eyes for the first time. But it wasn't anger. It was disappointment. He said he wasn't mad at her for falling in love with another man. He was devastated to realize that she had chosen to lie when she could have been honest. Emily tried to argue, but he cut her off. He said she had underestimated him. Who thought he would be too weak to react, to move on, to start over. And in that moment, she knew she had lost him. The next day, Emily appeared again, but not alone. She was accompanied by an older man, well-dressed, with a firm expression. He was her lawyer. Jason welcomed them into the living room with the same coldness as someone signing papers that close a cycle. As the lawyers discussed terms and clauses, he watched Emily. I noticed how she seemed smaller, lost, as if she hadn't yet understood the magnitude of the loss. They signed. They exchanged looks that said more than any words, and she left, but not before making one last request. She wanted to talk, one last time, without papers, without formalities. Jason didn't answer, he just closed the door. 2 weeks later, Jason was in a cafe, reading a book, when he saw a familiar figure approaching. It was Claire, the lawyer who handled his divorce. From the first meeting, there was something different about her. Not just beauty, but a serene firmness, a silent intelligence that could be seen in her eyes. They sat together. They started talking about trivial things, but little by little, the subject turned personal. Claire told him that she admired his poise, the way he handled everything, and Jason felt, for the first time in a long time, something move inside him. In the following days, they began to meet frequently. Walks in the park, long coffees, quiet dinners. There was no rush. There were no plans. Just the sincere desire to discover each other. Emily found out about the meetings through a mutual friend. And the moment he heard Claire's name, something in his face twitched viscerally. He tried to hide it, but he couldn't. She was overcome by a wave of fury and disbelief. Claire wasn't just the lawyer. He was someone I had known since college. They had grown apart over the years, but they still shared old bonds, common friendships, memories of their youth. It was as if a part of the past had returned to occupy a place that she herself had left vacant. She couldn't bear the idea. I needed to see Jason. I needed to understand what was happening. What he was feeling. So he looked for him again. He asked them to meet. The reunion took place late one afternoon. Emily was thinner, more haggard. Jason, on the other hand, looked like a different man. Firmer, more centered. She tried to start the conversation gently, but it didn't take long for her to bring up the subject. She said she knew about Claire, that she felt betrayed seeing them together, that this was like a second stab. Jason took a deep breath, leaned back in his chair, and told her that she was in no position to talk about cheating. Emily insisted. I wanted to know since when, I wanted to understand. Jason just replied that it all happened naturally. That Claire was a good surprise, a breath of life. But what she said next brought everything to a standstill. With tears in her eyes, Emily asked if Jason knew everything about Claire. He frowned, confused. She hesitated, bit her lip, and then blurted out, Claire had always been in love with him. Since before they were married. Since the time when they were all friends at university. She said she was the one who pulled away when she realized he and Emily were getting closer. That she had disappeared by choice, but now, seeing him vulnerable, she took the opportunity. Jason laughed. He said that didn't make sense. That Claire had never shown anything. That if it were true, he would know. But Emily, between sobs, continued. She said she wasn't making it up. That she had proof. That she had found, years ago, a note that Claire had never sent, written in which she declared her love for him, saying that she would let him go, but that she would never stop loving him. Jason was silent, his head spinning. Was it possible? Had Claire been silently falling in love all this time? Had she been there for their wedding? Had she been invited by Emily? Had she remained silent while they built a life together? And now, after the destruction, she had resurfaced as a kind of cure. The revelation hit him like a punch. Not because Claire's love was a problem. But because suddenly everything seemed to have gained a new layer. The time, the meetings, the advice during the divorce, the glances. Was it possible that it was all connected? That Claire had waited all these years to finally experience that love? Emily, seeing the confusion in Jason's eyes, continued. He said he never had the courage to tell, because he was ashamed. Who knew Claire would never cross certain boundaries? But now, seeing them together, he realized that perhaps Claire had just been waiting for the right moment. Jason didn't say anything else. He said goodbye coldly. And when he stepped out, he felt the ground move beneath his feet. The love that was beginning to blossom was now mixed with doubt. And what was once a certainty became a question. But what he didn't know yet was that the note existed. And that its contents were more devastating than any he could have imagined. And when he finally gets access to it, the truth will not only redefine his past, it will change everything about his future. Jason spent the next 2 days in silence. His mind was a labyrinth where each step led him to a new question. Emily's words echoed in a disorganized way, trying to form a coherent image of what, until then, was just a recent, genuine feeling, without marks of the past. Claire, with her firm posture and discreet gestures, had become the most serene presence in his life since the divorce. The possibility that she had nurtured a love for him for all those years cut his perception of reality like a sharp blade, because, if it were true, what he now interpreted as something pure and spontaneous could be seen as the consequence of a long silent wait. And, more than that, it questioned the authenticity of what they were building. Not knowing how to digest that alone, Jason decided to face what needed to be done. He called Claire in the middle of the afternoon, asked to see her that evening, and the restrained tone in his voice immediately alerted her that something was not right. They met at the same cafe where they had started meeting frequently after the end of their marriage, a small, discreet place, hidden among trees and opaque shop windows. He arrived first and chose a table at the back, away from the entrance. It was raining lightly when she arrived, with her hair tied up and a dark blue coat. When she saw him, she smiled tenderly, but her smile faded when she noticed the rigidity in his gaze. Claire sat down slowly, placed her bag on her lap, and waited. Jason didn't touch her, didn't greet her with his usual warmth. Instead, he dove straight into the subject. He told her about what Emily had said, about the note, about their supposedly old feelings. He watched her every reaction in silence, waiting for a sign, a change in her expression that would give him some truth that wasn't being said in words. Claire took a deep breath, lowered her eyes for a moment, and when she looked back at him, she was calm. She said yes, it was true. She had fallen in love with him back in college, long before he and Emily became a couple. That she had carried that feeling for a long time, but never did anything about it. That she had watched, from a distance, their relationship grow stronger, and that, when they got married, she made the decision to distance herself, because she could no longer live with the pain of being close and not being able to be. Jason remained silent, digesting each word as if swallowing shards of glass. Claire continued, her voice firm but full of emotion. He said that the note did exist, but that he never intended to deliver it. Which was a way of exorcising the feeling. A confession that was kept in an old box, until, without realizing it, Emily found it years later, when she spent a weekend at the house of a mutual friend. That she never mentioned the note, never confronted her. He just walked away further, silently. Claire said that when Jason appeared in her life again, she resisted. It took him a while to accept that perhaps it was destiny that put them face to face. But everything I felt now was real. That her love for him, even though it was old, had changed. It was no longer a stifled desire, but a mature, clean, free choice. Jason listened to her, and part of him wanted to believe her. He wanted to accept that this was all part of a different time, that there was no hidden agenda behind her approach. But the other part, marked by the still fresh pain of betrayal, wondered if he was capable of trusting her again. Claire, sensing the tension, reached out and said that she didn't want to rush, that she expected nothing from him but the truth. That if he needed to walk away, she would understand. That she would rather lose him for honesty than keep him for insecurity. He held her hand. He said he needed time. She nodded, stood up, kissed him on the forehead, and left. Jason stood there for a long time, watching the rain thicken on the other side of the glass. In the days that followed, he threw himself into work as a way of escaping. He avoided conversations, ignored calls, including from Emily, who seemed determined to sabotage any attempt at emotional reconstruction. But Jason wasn't interested in reliving the past. What hurt him was the present being poisoned by ghosts of unresolved stories. He needed to understand his feelings, he needed to reorganize what he felt for Claire, whether it was still a desire for reconstruction or just disguised gratitude. It was then that, at the end of a gray afternoon, when he returned home, he found an envelope under the door. It was in Claire's handwriting. Inside, a single sheet. It wasn't the old note. It was something new. A letter written the night they met at the cafe, where she said everything she couldn't say while looking into his eyes. In the letter, Claire confessed that her love for him had never been an obsession, but rather a feeling that she had learned to cultivate with dignity. That she didn't expect him to reciprocate immediately, but that she wanted to make it clear that what was between them now was different. That she didn't want it to be a consequence of his failure with Emily, but rather his choice for something new, whole, real. And at the end, she said that, if he was willing, she would wait for him. Not for years like before, but just as long as it took for him to be sure that he was loving again, not just being loved. Jason read and reread that letter like someone rediscovering a forgotten language. For the first time, he felt that someone was willing to love him without urgency, without demanding that he heal his pain in short deadlines. That set him free. He sat at the table with the letter in his hands and cried. Not because of the past, nor because of the pain. She cried because she could finally see love again without feeling guilty. A few weeks later, he decided to look for Claire. But this time, not in cafes or restaurants. He went to her house, with flowers in his hands, his heart open. She received him with surprise, but with her eyes lit up. Jason didn't need to say much. He just hugged her. He said he had read the letter 100 times and that with each reading he found a piece of himself that he thought he had lost. Claire smiled, and in that smile, there was everything he needed to start over. Across town, Emily watched everything fall apart. She had tried to get closer to Jason several times, but he was a different man now. Calmer, more attentive, but inaccessible to her. She realized, belatedly, that it wasn't his love that she had lost, it was his respect. And that, once broken, cannot be rebuilt with apologies. The greatest punishment, she now understood, was not seeing him with someone else. It was realizing that he was more whole than when he was with her. And that, somehow, that could never be erased. Jason and Claire continued with firm steps, building something that was not born from the desire to forget, but from the desire to live the new with authenticity. And although the ghosts of the past still haunted them some nights, they learned together to erase them with real love. The kind of love that doesn't need to be explained, just lived. Because sometimes, after the deepest pain, what's left is exactly what you've always been looking for. The peace of being who you are, alongside those you choose to stay with. Jason knew that no story can be restarted without carrying the weight of the previous one, so after that night when Claire received him with serenity and firm eyes, he began to live a new type of silence. It was no longer that bitter silence that inhabits the voids left by broken promises, but an almost sacred silence, of someone who understands that certain wounds do not need healing, just space. The days spent with her became lighter, but no less profound. He woke up with less urgency, with less need to prove himself or anything. For the first time, he felt truly accompanied, without fear of being read from within, without fear of being seen in his raw form. Claire, for her part, did not demand words that he could not yet give. His presence was enough for her, his gestures that, although restrained, carried intention. There was a silent care between them both, like someone learning to play an ancient instrument with the reverence of someone who knows its value. But, like everything that is real, time began to bring to light not only the beauty of that rebirth, but also the dilemmas that had not been fully faced. Jason, although firm in his decision, still had unresolved issues with Emily. What remained between them was not love, nor anger. It was something more complex, a sense of responsibility for everything they had experienced, a memory built together that he did not want to erase, but neither did he intend to carry like a chain. Emily, in turn, had begun a delicate process of reconstruction. She began therapy, returned to teaching more intensely, reconnected with old friends that she herself had distanced herself from during the years of marriage. She was trying to understand herself outside the framework of being a wife, outside the idea of belonging to someone. And, in the process, she understood more clearly what she had lost, not only Jason, but herself. It was on a cloudy afternoon that Emily asked to meet. She didn't want to argue or propose reconciliation. She just wanted to talk, to understand. Jason accepted, not out of curiosity, but out of respect for the history they had built. They met in a neutral place, far from the cafes and restaurants they had frequented in the past. When she saw him arrive, Emily realized that this man was no longer the same. He sat down with a calm look on his face, as if he was willing to listen, but not to reopen wounds. She began by thanking him for his presence, for his willingness to listen to her. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but she needed to talk about what she had been feeling. She confessed that she had spent a lot of time trying to understand what had led her to cheat, and that, although she was aware of the wrong choice, she also now understood that it was a reflection of an old emptiness that she had tried to ignore for years. She said that she felt alone with him, not because of a lack of love, but because she herself had distanced herself from her own identity. She had become an extension of the marriage, not a whole person. And, in this disconnect, she looked outside for what she couldn't rescue inside. Jason listened attentively. Not to absorb justifications, but to witness the transformation of someone he had once loved deeply. When she finished, he took a deep breath and said that, in a way, he understood. That he was not there to judge the past, but to understand how to move on in peace. Emily thanked him for those words, for that maturity she knew she would never find in another man. She asked about Claire, wanted to know if he was happy. Jason hesitated, and then said that he was learning how to be. That what he had with Claire was different from everything he had known before, and precisely for that reason, he was still adapting. Emily smiled sadly, and said that she hoped he was happy, because if there was anyone who deserved it, it was him. When they said goodbye, there was no hug, no promises to keep in touch. Just a silent and sincere goodbye, which sealed the end of an era. After that encounter, Jason felt something strange, not discomfort, but a kind of melancholy relief. It was as if, by closing that cycle with dignity, I could finally move on. That night, when he met Claire again, he told her about the conversation. She listened without interrupting, with the same calm look of someone who trusts in the love she has built. She said she admired the way he dealt with the past, and that she would never feel insecure when faced with something resolved so clearly. Jason, upon hearing this, felt deeply grateful. This was the kind of partnership he wanted to live. No more relationships built on dependence, but on the freedom to be who you are, even with all the flaws and scars. The following days brought news. Jason received an offer to lead a new project in another state. It was an opportunity he would have turned down months ago, stuck in roots that no longer existed. But now, everything seemed different. When he told Claire, she didn't hesitate. She said she would support him in whatever decision he made, and that if he wanted, she would go with him. Jason didn't respond right away. He needed to think, not about the job, but about what this new phase meant. And as he reflected, he realized that, for the first time, the decisions in his life were not being shaped by escaping pain, but by the possibility of building something with purpose. In parallel, Emily started writing a book. Inspired by her own failures, she decided to create a fictional narrative based on the complexities of a failing marriage. The process was cathartic, and helped her to release emotions that had previously been silently expressed. During one of her sessions with her therapist, she confessed that she had never understood the value of loss until she lost Jason. And, more than that, just seeing him happy with someone else made her realize how much she needed to find herself. She decided that she would not move, that she would stay where she was, but that she would live differently. For the first time, alone, without guilt, without trying to win back what no longer belonged to her. Jason, in turn, accepted the job offer and began organizing the move. Claire, as she had promised, was by his side every step of the way. Not to guide him, but to accompany him. It was all new, intense, scary. But there was no doubt. One of the nights before the trip, they sat together on the porch of the new house. Jason looked at her for long minutes, and then said that, even though he had lived a love that had lasted for years, it was with her that he finally understood what it was to truly love. Claire held his hand, smiled, and said that she felt the same way. That she had never imagined that the love she had stifled for so long would turn into something so free, so true. They were silent after that, but it was a silence full of meaning, a comfortable silence, that asked for nothing, only offered presence. As the move was completed and the two began to build a new routine, Jason found himself faced with one last pending item. Claire's note, the one she had written years ago and that Emily had mentioned. He had never asked to read it, and Claire had never offered to. But now, he felt he needed to see it with his own eyes. Not out of distrust, but out of completeness. When he asked Claire if he could read it, she didn't hesitate. She opened an old box, took out the aged envelope, and handed it to him naturally. Jason opened it slowly, as if opening a door to the past. The text was short, but profound. In it, Claire wrote that she accepted love from afar, that seeing Jason happy with Emily was more important to her than having him for herself. That she would rather keep it as a memory than destroy it by trying to force a future that wasn't hers. When he finished reading, Jason didn't cry. He just closed his eyes and took a deep breath. That was it. This was the woman who was by his side. Someone who knew how to wait without demanding. Who chose to love even without reciprocation. And who, now, was the reason he had found himself again. He looked at Claire with the certainty that, despite everything, it was worth going through what he had been through. Because only after losing everything was he able to understand the value of what really matters. And what would come next, would be greater than any pain that was left behind. Autumn arrived as a sign that things were finally changing for real. The leaves were beginning to fall on the sidewalks of the new city, and there was a certain symbolism in seeing the world outside undressing, as if it were following the internal process that Jason had been going through. Moving to another city was not just a professional decision, it was an emotional transition. The first few days were dedicated to packing away the past, and not just the objects, the memories as well. It was as if each piece placed on a new shelf represented the reorganization of who he had become. Claire, with her calm presence, adapted with an almost instinctive naturalness, and this helped him realize that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Even so, the transition was not a fairy tale. There were insecurities, fears, moments when he would still wake up at night with his heart aching due to memories that insisted on surviving even over time. But there was also a new construction underway, and this, he knew, needed time, care, and dedication. One day, returning from work, Jason found Claire in the backyard, sitting on the wooden floor with a cup of tea in her hands and her eyes turned to the gray sky. He approached slowly, sat down next to her, and without saying anything, held out his hand. Claire gently intertwined her fingers with his. They stood there in silence until she commented on the new cycle that was approaching. She said that after so many years of silence, she now felt that life was finally speaking to her back. Jason looked at her fondly, and then, almost without thinking, he spoke about a project that had been maturing in secret. He said he had started writing. A diary, perhaps, or some sort of account. That he needed to transform everything he experienced into something concrete, not for others, but for himself. Claire encouraged him. He said that words liberate, that writing is a way of giving meaning to what life often just throws at us. That sparked something in Jason, a desire to tell his own journey honestly, without embellishment, without hiding places. In the following days, he began waking up earlier to write, and each page filled was like a part of his soul being sewn back together. As the new routine took shape, a surprise came through an unexpected connection. It was an old number, a name that hadn't come up in a while, Olivia, Emily's sister. The conversation started off tense, but Jason soon realized there was no judgment intended. Olivia said she was just worried. That Emily had been isolating herself, that she refused to participate in family gatherings, that she seemed to carry a kind of sadness that she couldn't hide. He said he wasn't there to intercede, but that he thought Jason needed to know. He kindly thanked her, but ended the connection with a heavy heart. Not because of guilt, but because of that feeling that remains when something important falls apart and there is still debris scattered in the corners of your memory. Claire, upon learning of the connection, did not react with jealousy or insecurity. She just asked if he wanted to see her. Jason said he didn't know. I didn't know what I could say, or if there was anything worth saying. Claire just nodded, and said that if he went, it would be without burden, without the obligation to save anyone, just as someone who understood but had already moved on. Jason thought for days. It wasn't a question of reopening stories or harboring illusions. It was about actually closing what was perhaps still open. So he arranged a meeting with Emily. Not in a cafe, not anywhere that held memories. He chose a new square in the city center, a neutral space where they could be just two strangers with a shared history. When she arrived, Jason almost didn't recognize her right away. She was paler, her eyes were dark circles, but there was a kind of quiet dignity about her, of someone who had suffered, yes, but was trying to deal with it head-on. They sat on a bench out of the way, among trees that swayed gently in the wind. Emily was the first to speak. She said she didn't expect reconciliation, or friendship, or anything other than being able to look him in the eye one last time and tell him she had learned. He said that writing the book was a difficult but transformative process. That by putting his choices on paper, he understood how much he had hurt, but also how much he had hurt himself. She said she had forgiven herself now, but still carried the regret of not being better when she had the chance. Jason listened in silence, his head slightly bowed. When she finished, he simply said that he hoped she would be well. That everyone deserves a second chance, even if that chance is with themselves. Emily thanked him, holding back tears, and before they said goodbye, she handed him a bound copy of the manuscript she had been writing. She said he didn't have to read it, but that if he ever wanted to understand what was going on inside her, those pages told him more than she could ever say out loud. He accepted the gift, and they said goodbye with a firm, respectful, almost ceremonial handshake. When he returned home, Jason placed the manuscript on the shelf and didn't touch it for days. There was a boundary between the past and the present that he was still learning to respect. Meanwhile, Claire continued to be the gentle anchor in his life. One day, she suggested they travel. Not to escape, but to create new memories. They chose a small, secluded coastal town with quiet beaches and cobblestone streets. It was on this trip that Jason, without any planning, proposed to her. They were walking barefoot on the sand at dusk when he stopped, looked at her and said that for the first time, he wanted to make a choice without fear. That it wasn't about rebuilding, but about building. Claire hugged him tightly, without tears, just a long smile that lasted longer than any words. They decided that they would do something small, intimate, without over-the-top ceremony, just the two of them and the people who really mattered. Upon their return, they began to plan the new stage of their lives with a kind of joy that was not euphoric, but solid. Jason wrote the last chapter of his diary and decided to publish it as a column in a local magazine, under a pseudonym. It was a way of giving back to the world what he had learned, that the deepest pains can become fertile soil for the truest beginnings. Claire, in turn, received an offer to teach at a local university and accepted. Their home, previously marked by caution, became inhabited by plans, by new paintings on the walls, by dinners that ended with music in the background and promises whispered in the dark. One weekend, while sorting through old boxes, they found a forgotten photo, a young Jason and Emily, smiling at a long-ago anniversary. Claire picked it up, looked at it for a few seconds, and then gently returned it to the box. Jason said nothing, but his gesture of closing the lid was symbolic. It wasn't about erasing it, but about putting it back in its rightful place. And with that, he felt, for the first time, that the cycle was truly over. Not because the past no longer existed, but because it no longer had power. The wedding was scheduled for spring. A small event, with few guests and many meanings. Jason handwrote his vows in a letter he would deliver to Claire the night before. And although there were still noises inside, there were still shadows of other versions of himself, he knew that there was now enough light to move forward with his eyes open. Because the true end of a story of pain is not oblivion. It's the courage to remember, and still choose to love. Spring has arrived with its silent spectacle of rebirth. The flowers in the gardens of the small house opened one by one as if each petal understood the symbolism of that moment. It was the wedding day. Jason woke up before the sun, sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Claire still sleeping, her breathing soft, her expression calm as if she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. He picked up the envelope he had left on the dresser the night before and walked out onto the porch. The sky was still saying goodbye to dawn, and there was a light breeze that seemed to bring with it memories of everything he had experienced up until then. Sitting in silence, he reread the letter he had written to her. It was simple, sincere, intense. He said that loving her was not an event, but a daily decision. That, by her side, he learned that trust is born from truth and that true love has no urgency, but depth. He put the letter back in the envelope and walked slowly inside. When Claire woke up, he was already making coffee. They didn't exchange many words that morning. Just smiles. The kind of silence between two people who have already said everything with their eyes. The ceremony was discreet, held in the backyard of the house. The closest friends, some family, and a soft guitar playing in the background. Claire wore a simple dress, her hair loose, her feet bare on the grass. Jason wore a light shirt, his gaze calm, his hands steady. When she read the vows, her voice slightly choked with emotion, she said that he was the first man she had waited for without knowing if he would be loved back and that now, being there by his side, was like living a page she had written years ago, with trembling hands and a whole heart. Jason responded with tears in his eyes, holding her hands tightly. There was no fanfare, no exaggeration. Just the truth. And the truth, told like that, raw and whole, has the power to move more than any rehearsed grandeur. That same afternoon, while the celebration was taking place, Emily received the printed copy of her book. The publisher, small but sensitive to the intensity of the narrative, took a chance on the story and decided to launch it as a standout among contemporary novels that explore real relationships. As she leafed through the book, she found the dedication she had written to herself, to all the women who have made mistakes trying to find themselves. May this book be a mirror and a door. There was still pain, yes, but there was no more bitterness. She decided that she would attend the launch event alone. He dressed soberly, arrived ahead of schedule, and greeted readers with humility. At one point, a woman approached and said that she had cried when reading the story, that she felt represented and understood. Emily smiled, held her hands and said that she did not write to justify her mistakes, but to avoid repeating them. At the end of the event, she walked alone to the taxi stand, and on that path, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, lightness. Life finally seemed to have stopped weighing so heavily on his shoulders. Jason and Claire spent their honeymoon in a secluded cabin between mountains and a lake. Days without signal, without watches, just the two of them and time breathing slowly. They spent their mornings walking along narrow trails, their afternoons reading side by side, and their nights inventing simple recipes and laughing at their disastrous attempts. They didn't talk about the past. Not because they denied it, but because they knew it had already been accepted, understood, and overcome. They lived the present to the fullest, and that was enough. Upon returning, Jason received an unexpected invitation. He would be a speaker at a conference on emotional reconstruction and autobiographical writing. Someone had read his column in the magazine and was moved by the sincerity of his narrative. He hesitated, but Claire encouraged him. She said that his story, told with dignity, could touch other people. He accepted, not as a way of exposing himself, but to share what he had learned, that starting over is possible, but it requires courage, and that no pain is in vain if it transforms us. On the day of the talk, as he walked to the stage, Jason felt his heart race. Not out of fear, but out of awareness of responsibility. He began his speech by saying that he never imagined that a divorce would become the starting point for the best phase of his life. That abandonment, betrayal, loss, had been harsh but necessary teachers. That forgiving is not forgetting, but deciding that the past will no longer dictate the tone of our steps. That rebuilding is not about erasing, but learning to live with the marks. At the end, he received a standing ovation and felt something change inside him. It was as if the pain had finally been transmuted into something greater. In contribution. Months later, Claire published her own book. A collection of letters he never sent. In it were words for the father she never knew, for the mother who left her too soon, for Jason when she was still just a memory of her youth, and for herself at different stages of her life. The book was a success among readers who sought to find meaning in their own scars. When Jason read it, he cried. Not because the words were new, but because now she could see every nuance of who Claire was and had always been. He told her that he had fallen in love 3 times, with the woman he met at university, with the lawyer who helped him start over, and now, with the writer who revealed her soul without fear. Emily continued to live alone, but not lonely. She kept friends close, joined a support group for women who had gone through traumatic divorces, and began giving talks on emotional maturity. Without realizing it, she became a reference for other women. At one of these meetings, she met someone. It wasn't a romance, not yet. But a sincere, calm connection. Someone who didn't know her for the mistake she had made, but for the woman she had become. For the first time, she felt like she could try again. Without rushing. Without neediness. Just with the awareness that love is not a rescue, it is a choice. And this choice can only be made when we learn to love ourselves without conditions. Time, with its mysterious way of guiding cycles, brought peace to all involved. Each one, in their own way, found a path to redemption that did not depend on the forgiveness of others, but on personal acceptance. Jason and Claire continued writing, traveling, and cultivating a relationship based on presence and listening. Emily learned to find beauty in ordinary days, and understood that happiness is not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. The past was not forgotten, but given new meaning. And that, in the end, was what made each one's destiny truly impactful. And you, what did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments, we want to know how this journey touched you. And of course, if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. Here, you will find intense, real stories that show how love, pain and overcoming go hand in hand. And don't forget, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. We are here to show that choices have consequences, and that the truth, even if painful, always finds a way to set you free. Until the next story.